Today I am reviewing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, part of the Complete Stories of Oz collection. So this collection, I made a started video in which I explained my history with it and why I wanted to read it. Just to recap that briefly though, I picked this up in the bookstores about 5 years ago and made an attempt to read through it cover to cover, and only got through the first 5 books or so before I kind of lost interest and petered out. I'm now making another attempt to get through this book, in which I'm trying to review it book by book, all the different 15 books within this collection. I mentioned that briefly because even though I'm only reviewing the first book now, I do have some familiarity with some of the books that are going to follow, and maybe talk about some of the contradictions between this book and some of the later books briefly. Also, when I made that started video saying that I was going to work my way through this book, I got a comment from Dane over at Dane Reads, who mentioned that he had also always been meaning to work his way through the series. He had done the first book in the series 3 years ago and reviewed it on his channel, and had been meaning to get around to the other ones. And I said, well, Dane, I'm going to be reading through them all in the next few months if you want to join me on this journey. After some back and forth, it looks like we're going to try and coordinate this as a bit of a buddy read, perhaps, going through the series. This first book, Dane already reviewed it 3 years ago. So for this first book, I'll be linking to his video from 3 years ago, and maybe referencing some of the comments that he made on his video. So go ahead and check out his video from 3 years ago, and then moving forward, maybe we'll be doing this in coordination. We'll see how it goes. And yeah, I don't suppose anyone else has always wanted to read through all the stories of Oz and has been looking for an excuse to read them. Now might be your excuse if you wanted to jump on board with this. Right, so The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Dane in his video made the comment. He said, you know, I was very familiar with this story already from the movie. And then he said, well, actually, I haven't seen the movie for years, and I'm due to rewatch it, but I'm familiar with this story just by popular culture, just because it's, you know, so much in the popular culture that everybody knows it. And I think that actually sums up my state as well. I feel like I remember the movie very well, but actually I haven't seen the movie since I was, I don't know, 5 or something, or 6. I haven't seen the movie since I was a child. I saw it once. It was okay. I got a little bit bored by some of the songs, and I've never seen it again. So I am way overdue to rewatch that movie. But even if you've never seen the movie, or if you haven't seen it in years, you know. I mean, it's such a cliche, isn't it? It's like, well, it's like any other it's like any other classic movie, like Citizen Kane. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know the lines, or Casablanca, or something like that. So to a large part of this book lines up fairly well with what you know from the movie, or what you know about pop culture. Dorothy, the Yellow Brick Road, the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodsman, the Lion. And then, perhaps surprisingly, there's some things in this book which are quite different from the movie, or quite different from what you might know from pop culture. So it makes sense to talk about the stuff that you don't already know, right? You no sense talking about the stuff that everyone is familiar with. Yeah, this book was published in 1900. According to Wikipedia, the original illustrations were a big part of the book's appeal, And in fact, one critic even mentioned that without those illustrations, it might be a little bit difficult for children to tell what was going on or to visualize some of these strange creatures, but the illustrations really make the book. Unfortunately, this edition I got here has no pictures. It's all text. So I'm doing this without the illustrations. I don't remember that being a big impediment the last time I tried to tackle this book. I was able to still visualize everything, and I was still able to follow the narrative without the illustrations, both for this book and the subsequent books. But undoubtedly, I am probably missing out on a lot of the charm. So, you know, if you're thinking about ordering this off of Amazon or something like that, just be aware that the illustrations, which were made such an impression on this book's original audience, are not in this edition. Sorry, my camera just shut down. I'll start again. According to Wikipedia, there are actually two different versions of illustrations. There's one published in 1900, and then there was one published after the movie came out in 1939, which apparently the second one was more influenced by the movie. And perhaps there are other illustrations even after that. I'm sure there are other illustrations even after that. So I was missing out on the illustrations with this book, but I did go to Wikipedia Commons and look them up after I finished reading the book. Book was published all the way back in 1900, and it's got this introduction here, which I'll read. It says, Introduction. Folklore, legends, myths, and fairy tales have followed childhood through the ages. For every healthy youngster has a wholesome and instinctive love of stories, fantastic, marvelous, and manifestly unreal. The winged fairies of Grimm and Andersen have brought more happiness to childish hearts than all other human creations. So just a small nitpick here, as someone who just got done reading the Brothers Grimm, there are actually no fairies in the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. I thought I would nitpick that since I just got done reading the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. But anyways, he goes on in this introduction to essentially say, those old stories served their purpose for their time, but the young reader is no longer interested in those moralizing tales, especially because those moralizing tales can be a little bit violent. What does he say? So he says that the stereotyped genie, dwarf, and fairy are eliminated, together with the horrible and blood-curdling incidents devised by their authors to point a fearsome moral to each tale. But even after saying that, there is quite a high body count in the first book here, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, excuse me. This is something that's interesting to compare with the rest of the series, because in the rest of the series, it will become established that nobody dies in Oz. It's kind of this utopian land where everything's safe and happy, and that is not the way that the first book is at all. So it's one of those little interesting contradictions. I don't know, is it interesting or annoying? I guess it depends. If you're a continuity nerd, which I definitely can be, it's annoying to have this huge continuity problem between the first book in the series and all the rest of them. On the other hand, if you get into the evolution of this series and how it evolved over time, it's just interesting to track those different ideological developments that you see progress through this series. It was not planned out as a series at all. Apparently, L. Frank Baum intended this as a one-off, and then just kept needing money. So he kept having to go back to the series over and over again because he needed the money, and that, and also because the fans kept requesting more and more stories in this series. And so because nothing was planned, that accounts for some of the contradictions that will later come up. But yeah, I guess while I'm on the subject, yeah, the first book does have a high body count. Spoilers, by the way. If I didn't make it clear earlier, I'm going to spoil everything in this book. So, for example, when they're going after the Wicked Witch, she sends out first, I think, 40 wolves against them, and the Tin Woodman chops off their heads with an axe, one by one. Right, which is, I guess, while I'm mentioning this, I should also talk about the style of narration throughout this book. As you heard in that author's introduction I just read, he's referencing the Brothers Grimm, and indeed the whole thing does have a fairy tale-esque tone and style to it. So it's like the 40 wolves rushed at the Tin Woodman, and then he cut off their heads until there were none left. And of course, if you're visualizing this, you're like, well, what? I mean, what's going on? Are the wolves just waiting and then just rushing at him one by one? I mean, why don't they all just swarm him and some of them attack him from behind? I mean, surely, okay, so the wolves can't. Maybe they can't harm the Tin Woodman because he's made of tin, but the whole group is together here. Surely the wolves could go around from behind and eat up Dorothy in the time it would take the Tin Woodman to kill 20 of them, maybe. That kind of thing is all throughout the book, where you really can't bring in that logic to it. You just have to imagine this like a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale, where you just have to accept it that, okay, the 40 wolves came and the Tin Woodsman cut off their heads. And then after the wolves came, then the Wicked Witch sent 40 crows, and the Scarecrow twisted off their heads. I mean, it's the 40 crows are coming, and the Scarecrow says, okay, let me handle this one. I'm a scarecrow, and crows are scared of me. Which is a little bit strange because it was already established earlier in the book that the Scarecrow was feeling like a failure because the crows actually weren't scared of him when he was up on the pole in the cornfield. But anyways, the 40 crows come, and the Scarecrow twists off their heads, and again, one by one. And then the 40 bees come, and how do they get rid of the bees again? I think the Scarecrow gets the idea to cover everyone else with his straw, and so the bees are trying to sting them through the straw, and then they lose their stinger and die. Is that what happened? The 40 bees die at any rate. So that's quite a high body count there. Later in the book, they're going through another forest, and turns out that the animals in this forest are being terrorized by some sort of monster, which is characterized as like a spider, but a spider as big as an elephant. So it's walking around and it's seeing animals, and it's picking them up, and it's just devouring them whole. And by the time Dorothy and her friends and the lion get there, so the lion asks, he says, well, do you have any other lions here in this forest? And they said, well, we used to, but the giant spider ate them all up. And so the lion says, okay, would you make, if I can kill the giant spider thing, will you make me the king of the beasts? And they said, yeah, fine. So then he finds the giant spider thing sleeping, and he notices that the head is connected to the body by like a very thin neck. So he just picks up a rock and slams it down and disconnects the head from the body, and the thing dies, of course. Now, none of this is presented in any kind of graphic detail, much like it's not presented in graphic detail in the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. But, I mean, still, it's ironic given that author's introduction where he says, he's going to try and dispense with all that fearsome stuff to have such a big body count in this book. So that's maybe one thing that's different from the movie. Although, and again, I haven't seen the movie in years, but how much better would that movie have been if they would have included the part with the giant spider eating everything? I mean, that was a real missed opportunity. I don't want to say it's not a classic, but it could have been a lot better if they would have included the giant spider eating all the animals and then getting his head cut off by the cowardly lion. I mean, it's still a classic, but I mean, it could have been like on another level if they had included that part. The structure of this book is it's a journey story, as you know. It's kind of like 3 different journey stories in one book. So the first, they're going to meet the wizard. So they go and they meet the wizard. And the wizard, and then you know the story. The lion asked for courage, and the Tin Woodsman asked for a heart, and the Scarecrow asked for brains. By the way, that thing in the movie where, you know, the Scarecrow wants the brains, but it turns out he's the smartest one of them all, and the Tin Woodman wants the heart, but it turns out you know he's the most emotional one of them all, etc. That's right in the book as well. So, you know, and it's not subtle at all. You figure out very quickly that the Scarecrow is actually the one who comes up with all their plans, and the Tin Woodman is such a bleeding heart. You know, he steps on a bug by accident, and then he just starts crying and crying until he rusts up. Actually, speaking of the Tin Woodman, his origin story is a little bit bizarre, and I actually don't remember how they explained it in the movie. But here in the book, he says that he was in love. He was in love with a Munchkin woman, and then what happened? Somebody got jealous or something, and so the Wicked Witch enchanted his axe. So, you know, he cut one arm off. And then he had it replaced with 10, and then he cut another arm off with his axe. So the axe was enchanted, so whenever he would swing it, it would kind of fly, so it would cut off a piece of his body. And then so he lost his limbs, and then it cut off his body, so he had to get his body replaced, and then he had to get his head replaced. And again, it's fairy tale logic. So you say, okay, I'm going to kind of go along with this. It's a little bit of a horrific image to imagine a guy being dismembered by his axe gradually. I mean, change it a little bit, and it could easily be in a horror film. But again, it's fairy tale logic, so you just go with it, and you just, okay, I'm just going to imagine that this is not as horrific as it sounds. But then the Tin Woodsman, because he's all made out of tin, he is no longer is no longer in love with that Munchkin woman who he had been in love with, and she just is waiting for him, and he has completely no desire for her anymore. So he thinks that if he gets the heart, then maybe he'll remember his love for this Munchkin woman he was once in love with. And presumably the Tin Woodsman was also a munchkin before he became made of tin. It's not explicit in the text, but that's what I'm imagining. But then, once he gets the heart at the end, then there's never any mention made about that Munchkin woman again. She's mentioned in his origin story, but then once he gets his heart, in fact, he goes off to become the ruler of the Winkies, and has no desire to. I don't know. Maybe that will be addressed in one of the later books. Maybe near the end of the series, book 15, he'll remember his Munchkin lover, or I don't know. Anyways, so they go on their journey. They get to the Wizard of Oz, and the Wizard of Oz says, "I'm not going to give you anything unless you kill the Wicked Witch of the West." Now, up until this time, the Wicked Witch of the West had not been the antagonist. I think she was mentioned briefly at the beginning of the book, but she wasn't trying to. She didn't make any threats about "give me those ruby red slippers" or anything like that. She hadn't appeared. She was up in the land of the West, minding her own business, not interfering with our heroes at all. Which I think is different from the movie, right? In the movie, right from the beginning, she's set up as the antagonist. In the book, she's mentioned, but she doesn't get set up as somebody they have to defeat until the Wizard of Oz says, "No, I'm not helping you unless you kill the Wicked Witch of the West." And I thought, that's different from the movie. But then I actually looked it up on Wikipedia, and apparently in Wikipedia that was also in the movie as well. I think the difference in the movie, though, is in the movie, Wicked Witch of the West was harassing them on their journey from the beginning. Is that right? I actually am. I should see the movie again one of these days. Oh, by the way, speaking of the ruby red slippers, this is something you can use at cocktail parties if you want to impress people. In the book, they are not ruby red slippers. They are silver slippers. They got changed to ruby red slippers for the movie for some reason. I don't know. It's on Wikipedia somewhere, I'm sure. But nobody told the illustrator of the complete stories of Oz. Apparently they must have hired some guy to do the illustration for this, and he said, "Well, okay, I don't need to read the book. I've seen the movie." And so this seems to happen a lot, doesn't it? With reprints of books, that they hire some illustrator who's obviously never read the book. Okay. Anyways, right. So it's a journey story. They journey to the Emerald City. Then they have to journey to confront the Wicked Witch. Then, as you know, just from pop culture or the movie, even after they've defeated the Wicked Witch and gotten back to the wizard, he is unable to help them because it turns out he's not a wizard at all. He's just somebody who got caught up in an hot air balloon. So he, same thing as the movie. He's got the hot air balloon. He's going to try and get Dorothy back to Kansas in the hot air balloon, and he himself is ready to leave Oz as well. But then, same thing as the movie, he ends up floating up in the hot air balloon and leaving Dorothy behind by accident. But then Dorothy has to journey all the way over to the south, I believe it is, to meet Glinda the Good Witch. And I think that extra journey is not in the movie. And that extra journey is where they encounter a lot more of these strange creatures, like that spider creature I was just mentioning. And they get attacked by fighting trees on this journey. Although I want to see if fighting trees was in the movie. Was that right? And then they go to the dainty China country, where everyone is made out of china, which I don't think was in the movie, but that was in that James Franco movie, right? Oz the Great and Powerful. There was that girl who was made out of china. So, there's this whole China country where everyone is running around made out of China. And then there are some other, hammerheads creatures who stop them from going over the mountains because they've got these heads that they use as hammers to knock everyone down. But by the way, this is characteristic of the first book, and as far as I can remember, the next few books in the series, where everything is there are all these just really silly ideas, and you're not quite sure whether to say, okay, that's just silly in a lazy way, or whether you're like, well, that's kind of just so lazy and bizarre that it's actually kind of cool. If memory serves, this kind of thing pops up all throughout the first several books. And yes, I think this is a case here with the hammerheads of, is that just lazy stupid, or is that just kind of lazy cool, intriguing? They get over the hammerheads with the help of the winged monkeys. Right. So this is another thing. The winged monkeys, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the movie they were only antagonists, right? They were these scary creatures that were only used to help the Wicked Witch. In the book, the Wicked Witch is using them, but there's like a special rule that anyone who has the special hat, if you have the special hat, you can summon the winged monkeys 3 times, and then after 3 times, you're done. And the winged monkeys are actually quite nice. They're not presented as being scary at all in the book. They have to do the bidding of whoever has the hat for 3 times. So then once Dorothy gets the hat, then the winged monkeys can help her, and the winged monkeys carry her over the land of the Hammerhead. And that's when they meet Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. Was it the South? Or was it the North? I'm forgetting all my directions. In Oz, there definitely is an east, west, north, and south, and different creatures and different lands there. And I'm beginning to forget which is which now. But and then Glinda directs her home. What else to talk about? Did anyone ever hear the theory that the Wonderful Wizard of Oz was an allegory about the monetary system in the U.S., like moving off of the gold standard, or was it staying on the gold standard? I don't remember which one. Something about the gold standard. This is one of those urban legends that depending on who was on your who you hung out with in college, you may have heard. I remember back in college there was a guy on my dormitory floor who was really into this and was explaining to the rest of us how all these different events in the Wonderful Wizard of Oz were actually allegories for the gold standard. Follow the yellow brick road, and it's if you research this or talk to somebody who's researched this, it actually gets quite detailed with every scene in the book, like having an allegory point. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, this theory is probably not true. Apparently, there was a guy who published a thesis advancing this theory, but nothing within none of the interpretations. Certainly, when this book first came out, that was not a popular interpretation. So I think it's mostly just an urban legend. But it's if you hear about the theory, it is kind of fun to just kind of go through the book and try and map everything onto this allegory about keeping the U.S. Monetary policy linked to the gold standard, which apparently was an issue in 1900. There is also, I should mention this because Dane mentions this in his review. There is also a scene where they're in a poppy fields, which again, if memory serves, that scene was also in the movie. Not exactly the same. I think in the movie, the Wicked Witch had something to do with it, right? In the book, it was just like these poppy fields that they had to get through. And the poppy fields make you go to sleep because the poppies have some sort of aroma or something. And Dane was saying in his review, he says, I'm pretty sure that's meant to be an allegory for opium. And maybe it is. Poppies, opium. Yeah. And as Dane points out, these opium allegories do tend to pop up in a lot of books of the period. Although I didn't see anything about that on Wikipedia or I mean, I wonder what the published opinion on that would be. What do you think? That scene with the poppy fields supposed to be an allegory for opium? It could well be. Yeah. What else to talk about? Actually, I may just try and wrap this video up here. Final thoughts. So it's a book which, it's one of those books which you should probably read, just if for no other reason than because it's a classic at this point. And it's such a classic. It was popular for years before the movie came out. I mean, the movie came out in 1939. It was a bestseller for 40 years before then. There was apparently a stage musical which helped keep it in popularity. It spawned this whole series. I was reading on Tor's website, I think they were saying that The Wizard of Oz is responsible for the fantasy series as we know it today. You know how fantasy books work nowadays. There's never just one book in a fantasy story. It always has to be a whole series. And apparently that's the legacy of The Wizard of Oz. At least that's what the reviewer at Tor website was saying. It's definitely it's not epic fantasy like Lord of the Rings. It's definitely more. They're definitely children's stories, very simplistic, kind of fairy tale-esque. The narration style is also very simplistic and fairy tale-esque, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good in the sense that it's easy to read. If you don't want heavy reading, this is not heavy reading, despite how big it is. It's just very simple, undemanding prose. It's bad in the sense that sometimes you want a little bit more from a story. I think, actually, that's perhaps the reason I did not make my way through this collection the first time. Having gotten about 500 pages into it, I just was not feeling like I was getting as much in-depth as I wanted from this. But I'm hoping now that I'm breaking this into smaller bits and reviewing each book in the series separately, that will get me through it. Okay, I've rambled on long enough here. I'm going to stop the video now.